Austin G writes, "Hey all, keep up the great work. I'm excited for the movie Madness Brackets. Dennis made a comment in a previous show about Need for Speed and its audience versus critic rating. Why is it that so many movies have very different ratings between critics and the audience who have seen them? I've seen many movies that critics scored around 20% to 30%, but audiences score around 60% to 80%. Which one determines a movie's success more, critics or audiences?"
Well, let's take that last part first. What determines the success? It's the
I
audience.
love this question.
It's the audience. I mean, the studios do care about the critics because they do, sway people's opinions, but it's not by much, And Transformers is a perfect example of that. Critics hated it, myself included. But it made a ton of money, and that's why they keep making more, and that's why they keep inviting Michael Bay back and gave him a truckload of money to make even the fourth one, even though he didn't want to. So, yeah, in terms of that, the success is definitely for the audience. Why do critics and audiences vary? I think expectations. I think critics have seen a lot more movies. Their expectations for certain things, maybe they get tired of certain things they've seen. So that's maybe why, but it's not all the time. I mean, I'd say the critics agree with the audience maybe at least 70% of the time.
It also depends on the genre. With horror, I always look at Rotten Tomatoes and I see, okay, if a horror film has like a 40% rating, it's usually probably pretty good. Because critics don't like horror films. They don't like certain comedies. They don't like, Adam Sandler movies or what have you. But generally audiences do. They know what they're getting out of these movies, and they know what they're going to see, and as long as they get that, they're happy with it.
It's also big on demographic. Like,
Yeah.
if it's a young adult movie, I guarantee you 90% of the critics are going to think it's boring and uneventful, and the people that the movie are made for are going to love it. And I see that happen all the time.
Divergent, perfect example.
A lot of them.
John?
Well, I mean, Jimmy, when you say, film critics don't like horror films, Jimmy, you are a film critic.
I know, but
and you like horror films. But I mean, look, here's the thing. Really, it's about perception. The perception is that the critics are always completely different than the audience. But the reality is, as Dennis was pointing out, is that that's not the case. The reality is they're usually within 20% of each other, the vast majority of the time. And sometimes they're not. And then Chris Lee brings up an excellent point. Remember, these viewer ratings are done by people who saw the film. So if you're talking about a Divergent, you're talking mostly about an audience that is predisposed to liking Divergent. Remember that motocross, I can't remember the exact name, it might have actually been called Motocross, that was out a bunch of years ago about, dirt bike racers and stuff like that. It was a horrible movie. It was just terrible. And nobody went to go see it except people who were really into motocross, and they went to go see it, and they liked it because it was about motocross. So the audience rating ends up being a lot higher than the critic rating because it was only really being reviewed by that specific demographic of audience. So sometimes when you see those differences, it's because of who actually saw the film and was that audience predisposed to liking it in the first place, as opposed to a general audience, as say represented by the critics, who aren't predisposed to liking it or not liking it in the first place. So the perception is different from the reality. The reality is the critic reviews are not often that different from the audience. Things you have to take in consideration, like what Chris Lee was saying about the demographic of who saw it.
If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to AMC Movie News on YouTube. It's free and a great way to stay updated with all the latest movie news and check out our daily show, AMC Movie Talk. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Twitter to stay in the loop for our special prizes, giveaways, and contests.